Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Penn State 365 podcast. My name is Dylan Cowan Curley, beat writer and recruiting analyst at Happy Valley Insider of the Rivals Network, covering Penn State athletics. I'm joined by my co-host, as always, Marty Leap, also of Happy Valley Insider, and our resident superfan, Anthony Hazan. Gentlemen, welcome back into the podcast. It is time for another Penn State preview, as we're previewing Penn State's whiteout game on Saturday night, 7:30 p.m. on CBS. Penn State, number 7 in the country, takes on the number 24 team in the country, the Iowa Hawkeyes. Both teams enter the week 3-0 on the season. Nittany Lions, a 14.5-point favorite here as of Thursday night. I guess we have a lot to get into here, so let's just kind of go right into it today. We briefly previewed this game on Sunday during our recap of the Illinois game. We all felt pretty confident this is a game that could be similar to last week's game against Illinois. It could be close for a while. Penn State eventually pulls away in the second half just because that defense is so good, and the Penn State offense's talent eventually should be able to break through. We've had a few days to sleep on that, think about it. Now, less than 48 hours before kickoff, do we still feel the same way in general? Anthony, I'll start with you. How do you feel 48 hours until kickoff?
Yeah, I still think it's a pretty similar feeling. I think, Iowa's defense versus Illinois' defense, they're a little different in where their strengths are. Illinois, obviously, the strength of that team was their defensive line. Iowa, more so in their secondary. So it's a little bit of a different strategy for this Penn State offense going into the game. But I think overall, Iowa's defense is a little bit better on the whole than Illinois' defense is. So I still think the strategy is going to be the same going into that game. So I think it does still have a similar feeling to it.
Marty, how do you feel?
Yeah, very similar. Like Anthony said, I think Iowa's defense overall is better than Illinois. The difference is Iowa doesn't have a Johnny Newton running around out there looking to wreck the game, and I think that's a big factor Saturday night. But yeah, it's you're gonna have to play a clean game. I think one thing that's going to be different also is against Illinois. There were some tip balls and some overthrows that don't hurt you largely because of the defense they play. Against Iowa, balls like that will wind up interceptions, so that's something you've got to be careful with. But yeah, it's I'm with you guys. I said it Sunday. I still feel this way. It could be very similar to the Illinois game. Penn State's the more talented team, but they're going against the strong defense. I could see this thing being close for a half or so. Where I mean, I'm not saying as comfortable as the Illinois game was, where it was 30-7 in the closing minutes before Illinois got a garbage time touchdown, but definitely comfortable enough to where we're in the back half of that fourth quarter, if not sooner, and Penn State's going to win this thing. But it's not going to be an easy task. It never is with Iowa. I was on some other places this week talking about it, and I said what Iowa does so well year in and year out is they drag you down in the mud and they make you play their game, and that's how Iowa's it up and beats teams they're lesser talented than, and you just got to avoid falling into that trap Saturday night.
Absolutely. And if you are listening to us on YouTube, please be sure to subscribe to the channel here. And if you're listening to us on your favorite podcast app, well, and if you're not subscribed yet, perhaps you just came across us today, please be sure to subscribe on there as well. We'd appreciate all the listens and subscriptions. That being said, this Iowa team, guys, already had the deck stacked against them entering this game because of this how elite this Penn State defense is. An Iowa offense is never going to be flashy. I mean, I meant to probably say this at the top, but when you face an Iowa team, what we're going to say today is going to be the same that we could have said 2 years ago, and it's the same that we can talk about 5 years from now. All you have to do is change the names we're talking about. But what you're going to get with Iowa is a mediocre offense with average quarterback play at best, a good run game, good in the trenches on both sides of the ball, and a defense that may not be the most talented, may not be the most athletic, but they're fundamentally sound, they're gap sound, and they just take advantage of every mistake you make. They're a team that doesn't just try to beat you physically, they try to beat you mentally. If you're not a team that can get punched in the face and bounce back from being punched in the face, you have a poor chance of beating an Iowa team. And I think we're going to see how Penn State can react again, punch in the face this weekend. I think at some point they will. They got punched in the face a little bit last week against Illinois. Never was, not in the lead. But I think Penn State this week is probably going to have to take some punches early from Iowa, and we'll see how they bounce back from that. But if you can bounce back from those punches that Iowa throws at you, you have a good chance of being this Iowa team in the end. So, I mean, like I said, what we say today, we could say about the same thing in next year's game, the year after that, and the year after that. But this Iowa team already had the deck stacked against them, but now they're going to be coming into Happy Valley against an elite Penn State defense shorthanded. They're down their top two running backs and they're down their top tight end in this game. I mean, that's when I did the math, about 38% of Iowa's total offensive production this year. That's a lot of production to lose, especially early in a season when you don't have many other guys sticking out. And it would be the same way for Penn State. If Penn State was down their top three guys this year in terms of offensive output, the Nittany Lions would be in a big trouble. From a defensive standpoint and going up against Iowa offense, I mean, how is Iowa going to move the ball consistently against this Nittany Lions defense? I mean, I don't see them attacking Penn State's secondary all that much. And if you look at it, Iowa's offense this year, when thrown through the air, most of their successes come within 10 yards. I think within 10 yards, McNamara has about a 70% completion percentage. But when he goes for the deep passes, he's 10 for 28 on passes beyond 20 yards. So they're not going to be able to attack this secondary. And I think for the most part, Penn State can sell out against this run. I mean, do you guys see any way that Iowa moves the ball at any consistent rate in this game? Marty, I'll start with you this time.
Unless Penn State just is making mistakes, no, I don't. Can it happen? Sure. I mean, this is a defense that we've seen struggle with gap accountability in the past. Look at Michigan last year. I don't care who you're playing against. If you're struggling gap accountability, there's always the chance you can give up big plays. But
Sure,
yeah, it's very much your grandfather's Iowa. As long as Kirk Ferentz is the head coach, this is going to be what Iowa is.
yep.
And as you mentioned, Dylan, they're down their top two backs. The one positive thing you can always say about an Iowa offense is they churn out tight ends like nobody else in the country. And without Lachey, man, that's a big blow because their receivers are not very good.
No.
This is not a good receiver room. You lose Lachey. I mean, Eric All is still there. We all remember Eric All from that 2021 Michigan game, his game-winning catch at the end there. But, yeah, without Penn State's defense coming out and just being undisciplined, stupid penalties, whatever it might be, I don't see any way Iowa consistently marches up and down the field on Penn State. I mean, this is not to say they're not going to move the ball at all. I'm sure they'll have a drive or two, or they'll move the ball, get some points.
They'll get a big player too.
Yeah, but it's just I can't see them consistently moving the ball on Penn State's defense. It's just you combine what their offense is with what Penn State's defense is, and you'd like to think that's a recipe for success for the Nittany Lions.
Yeah, I mean, if we're just on paper, if we're talking what this Iowa offense could possibly score on Saturday, I mean, I don't know if I can see Iowa get more than 14 points on the board. I don't know if they're going to, for the game, have more than 200 yards of total offense because I just don't see, unless, and it's possible because it's an Iowa offensive line, but unless Iowa's offensive line, maybe it's not possible because I don't think Penn State defensive line will get mauled, but unless Iowa's offensive line completely mauls the Nittany Lions front seven, I just don't see how Iowa's going to move the ball at any consistent rate. Like you said, Marty, they'll get some chunk plays here and there. They'll have a drive or two, but I don't see how they're going to just do it consistently enough to have a chance at winning this game. Anthony, what's your thoughts on Iowa's offense being able to move the ball without their top two running backs, their top tight end, and also worth mentioning, Cade McNamara through the first 3 weeks has not looked good. And it looks like he's been banged up to a degree as well. He suffered some sort of injury in camp, it looked like, during their one practice. And he just hasn't looked himself this year so far.
Yeah, he's been inconsistent through his first 3 games, and I think that that does play in Penn State's favor. That he was never really a mobile quarterback to begin with. He could
Yeah.
move, he could scramble. He's not a statue, but
Yeah.
he's also not a guy that's gonna run free like we've seen from Luke Altmaier or Garrett Green in the last few
Yep.
weeks. So it does play into Penn State's favor, where if you can take away the run game, which obviously is already coming in shorthanded. I will say that Jason Patterson and Kamari Moulton had good weeks last week
Yeah.
against, I believe, Western Michigan.
And
Patterson,
so did Lyshawn Williams, who came in uh, for and came in and had like 160 yards or something. But Patterson and Mathuti are going to be probably their top two backs this week. And so, as you were saying,
yeah, so they had good weeks last week. So, they'll be able to, we'll see if they can carry that in against a better opponent, obviously, in Penn State, a clear step up. But if you can take away the run game, if you're Penn State, and you're forcing McNamara to throw the ball, especially without Lachey, that is such a huge loss for them to not have Lachey for this game, because he's a legitimate second team all. He was preseason second team all Big Ten.
yeah,
He was a legitimate all Big Ten guy at the end of the year, and he was their leading receiver.
yeah,
So, Eric All is very capable. He's actually their second leading receiver. So it's a passing attack that relies very heavily on the tight
of
ends.
course.
But, that's a huge loss in the passing game for a passing attack that was already pretty anemic as it was. So yeah, to make a long story short, I have a hard time seeing Iowa moving the ball consistently. Like you guys said, I think they'll hit some big plays here, like here and there, just because throughout the flow of a game, it's bound to happen at some point. West Virginia hit a big play or two. Illinois hit a big play or two. They'll have a drive or two where they get some points on the board, but I can't see them throughout the flow of the game moving the ball on Penn State's defense with a lot of consistency.
And I will say this with those two running backs, how much is Iowa going to trust them? Because they're true freshmen. They're true freshmen playing in their first true major away. I mean, I know they faced Iowa. Was Iowa State at home for the Hawkeyes this year? Was that that was at Ames, in Ames? But still, this is going to be a much different atmosphere than that atmosphere in Ames, and I know that's a big rivalry game, but 107,000 plus on Saturday night game, ruckus crowd, primetime TV. This is a rivalry game in itself between these two programs. How much are they going to trust them to just be consistent enough? And on the flip side, if they can't, do you want anything to add? Yeah.
Yeah, I want to correct
Sure.
myself. So
Sure.
it's actually Jason Patterson is actually one of the guys that's hurt this week. It's LaShawn Williams that had the big league last week against Western Michigan,
Yeah.
and he's going to be the starting back with Kamari Moulton. So I just want to
Okay.
correct myself
Sure.
on that.
And they do have a third back, which is another freshman. Williams has been around for a few years, but there are two freshman running backs who are going to see their fair share of carries. Williams will, like you said, probably be the lead back this week, but I think it's going to be a running back by committee. I think the one place that could potentially, as you both mentioned, that could be a spot for Iowa to move the ball is that tight end position. Eric All, they have a couple other tight ends they like in that room. It's going to be a good test for Penn State's linebackers this year. They haven't really faced, a dominant tight end room. And not that this tight end room has been dominant this year, but you trust Iowa tight ends to be productive. And Eric All, I mean, this is a guy who has faced Penn State in the past. We know what he did a couple years ago. He's the reason Penn State lost that game to Michigan. So I mean, it's going to be a very important game for Penn State's linebackers in this one to keep those tight ends in check. They have to be sound fundamentally in their coverage, and you can't afford missed tackles in this game on the tight ends. That's pretty much the only way Iowa's going to be able to move the ball consistently is if Penn State's tackle struggles from week one and then last week against Illinois, especially in that first half, bleed into this week. If Penn State can wrap up Iowa's ball carriers, the tight ends, the running backs, they should have no problem shutting down this Hawkeyes offense. Do you guys have any concern about the linebacker room against Iowa's tight ends? I know Iowa's tight ends aren't the most athletic guys per se, but Abdul Carter and Curtis Jacobs, both very athletic, but they are they both are linebackers who at times could play too fast, sometimes to their that to a degree that it hurts them. They miss tackles, they run past guys. They've done that in the past. Any concern about how the linebackers match up against tight ends this week?
I can't say I'm too concerned of it. I mean, we came into the season just seeing the potential praises of this tight end room. And I know Abdul Carter did not have his best game against West Virginia, but he's been really good the last 2
Yeah,
weeks, especially against Illinois. I would argue Curtis Jacobs has been the best player on this defense through three
sure.
weeks. I think we've seen Kobe King make strides, and low key, Dom DeLuca has been really good.
Yeah,
So I can't say I'm worried about it. I think this tight end room, or excuse me, this linebacker
linebacker.
room is as good as just about any on this roster right now, in my opinion. So anytime Penn State's going into a game where you say, man, their linebackers gonna have to play a big role in the defense this week, I'm gonna feel good about it because I think this linebacker room is very, very good.
Anthony.
Yeah, not a whole lot of concern. I pretty much agree with Marty. I think, Jacobs, for as much as Carter has the highest ceiling and he gets the most attention, Curtis Jacobs has been the most consistent guy. And he moves around and plays kind of all three positions at linebacker depending on the down. But, he can play that same position and he can absolutely cover. He was a safety in high school. He's got coverage skills. He could cover Eric All, and he could definitely help out in coverage where necessary against those bigger guys. Dom DeLuca is another one that I think could also. I wouldn't put him 1-on-1 necessarily against Eric All too much, but he absolutely can help out in coverage, and he's athletic enough to be out there and make plays, and as
Yeah,
he's done before.
I mean
So
he's been their best linebacker in coverage so far this year by PFF grades at least. But I think the PFF grades match what we've seen on the field in coverage this year as well. He's been very fundamentally sound this year, and it's paying off for them.
yeah, so they'll mix and match, and I'm sure there'll be DBs on the tight ends at times as well. So Manny Diaz knows what he's doing out there. He'll mix and match and get the right coverages and the right one-on-one situations. I'm not overly concerned about it.
Sure. Um, this is also going to be a big test for Penn State's defensive line. This Iowa offensive line is uh, might be the best offensive line they've faced. I mean, the West Virginia offensive line is pretty damn good, but this Iowa offensive line has been very good this year. Obviously, has not faced a ton of talent, but outside of last year, the one thing that's pretty certain about Iowa is that they're dominant in the trenches on both sides of the ball. Um, so I think this would be a good test for Penn State's defensive line. I'm not really sure what to expect just because what Iowa hasn't really faced. I'm sure Iowa will get the better part of Penn State's defensive line at times, but I expect the Nittany Lions pass rush to get to McNamara plenty as well. Um, Last thing on the defense, I think what will be important, uh, just for linebackers, but also the corners, and for the defense as well as a whole, that whether it's first and 10, second and 5, whatever it may be, um, that those 10 yards between the line of scrim from the line of scrimmage to the next 10 yards is where Iowa's going to live and die offensively through the air. So the linebackers are going to have to be big, not just against tight ends, but also just in general zone coverage against Iowa's passing attack, but also the corners when they're going across, the middle of the field there, which some of their the Iowa wide receivers will have to play fundamentally sound. Their communication is going to be key because if you're able to keep Iowa's yards after a catch to a minimum in this game, it's going to be a huge recipe for success for Penn State. Like I said with the linebackers, the only way I think Iowa moves the ball here consistently is if the Nittany Lions have a ton of missed tackles on those, short little dink plays of 5 to 10 yards. Any any final thoughts on the defense?
I actually want to go back to what you said about the offensive line.
Sure.
I would actually argue that this is not to the normal standard of Iowa's offensive lines that
It's
we
probably fair.
see on a yearly basis. It's not a bad offensive line
Yeah.
by any stretch, But if I was comparing this one to West Virginia's, I would still take West Virginia's. Iowa's got some decent pieces on that offensive line, but they don't have an all-American center like West Virginia does.
Sure.
They don't have multiple guys that are going to be all conference like West Virginia does. So, in terms of a bigger test, I would still go with West Virginia. And Iowa for the year on the offensive line, they've been pretty solid in run blocking, as you would expect from an Iowa offensive line. But they've given up 6 sacks for the first 3 games, which is like 69th in the country, I believe.
Sure.
Tied for 69th with like 5 other teams. So, passing wise, I think there's opportunity there for Penn State to get to the quarterback. Manny Diaz is incredibly aggressive, as we all know. I think he's going to send a lot of people at Cade McNamara. I'm sure you guys have seen that video of McNamara at the press conference where he starts giggling like a child at one of his comments. If you haven't seen it, it's very funny. Look it up. But I think there's a lot of truth to what he was saying too. That Penn State is going to be aggressive, and in passing situations, they are going to send the house to try to pressure McNamara into making mistakes.
That's very fair. Marty, any last thoughts on the defense?
No, I just agree with Anthony. I think West Virginia's offensive line is significantly better than Iowa's.
Sure.
Like he said, this is not by Iowa standards. This is not a good offensive line. So yeah, I think this could be a big weekend for the defensive ends. We haven't really seen them get going yet in terms of the sack numbers. They've played extremely well. These defensive ends have impacted the game in a lot of ways thus far outside of sack numbers. I mean, against Illinois, Adiz Isaac was probably the best player on the field for Penn State's defense. Chop Robinson might not have been far behind him, but I wouldn't be surprised to see the sacks get going this weekend because, again, like Anthony said, this Iowa offensive line is not what you think of when you think of Iowa offensive lines. And I've said it before, I'll continue to hammer it. Other than Michigan, West Virginia is the best offensive line Penn State will see this season.
Yeah, I agree with you guys to a degree. I think overall, definitely not an Iowa offensive line as we've seen in the past, but I still think probably one of the better tests for the defensive line this season. Michigan also will be a test. Ohio State's offensive line has been decent so far as well. But I mean, we'll ultimately see how it goes on Saturday. Even if even if Iowa's offensive line isn't to the degree it's been in the past, it's one of those things where I'm also not. I have a hard time counting out anything Kurt Ferentz touches. It's just he lives for these moments. I do think Penn State wins. We'll get into our predictions in a little bit, but I do think for at least early on, Iowa is going to be maybe clicking on all cylinders. I just don't think that's going to be able to last for 4 quarters. So we'll see. But great points all around by you. And yeah, West Virginia's offensive line probably still the better one that they've faced this year. And West Virginia's offensive line looked really good last week against Pittsburgh as well, of course, as well. Which we could talk about that game if we wanted to. That set football back about 50 years. Going to the offensive side of the ball for Penn State.
Pitt lost, so no matter how many years set football back, it was a great game.
Going to the offensive side of the ball. This is going to be a real test for this Penn State offense that struggled a little bit last week, kind of got it going as the week went on. But what Iowa defenses don't do anything special. They're just good in the trenches. The pass rush is going to have its moments. The linebackers are sound fundamentally. They're gap sound. The entire team's gap sound. It's a good defense. They have guys. They have some good athletes on there. And they just wait for you to make mistakes. I think that's ultimately what's going to probably be a big factor in this game. If Penn State has 3 plus turnovers in this game, Iowa has a good shot of pulling off the upset. But if Penn State is able to keep their hands on the ball, not fumble it, Drew doesn't throw interceptions, I don't think Iowa has a shot. I've heard some people say Penn State's due for turnovers. I mean, sure, in the fact that they have no turnovers yet this season. But I'm also not a huge believer that you're due for turnovers just because you haven't done it. Not having turnovers is a result of being fundamentally sound. This Penn State offense is just fundamentally sound in how they hold onto the ball in the rushing game. Katron Allen, Nicholas Singleton, you don't see them, holding the ball 5 feet off their body like we do in the NFL sometimes. Saquon, I think, did that sometimes in the past too. Miles Sanders had some struggles. But those two running backs don't really do that. They always have the ball tight. Um, Drew, when he gets hit, he does a pretty good job of bringing that ball into his body and keeping it tied to him, not allowing it to get free. The wide receivers seem to be doing a fine job at it. But also, interceptions. Drew, how many turnover worthy throws has Drew actually thrown this year? Maybe one per game. I mean, there's the West Virginia dropped interception that stands out. Some could point to that play against Illinois last week where Dante Cephas fell down. But outside that, Drew's been very good at his decision making and his throws. And when he misses pretty, you know, to the point where it's not going to have a chance to be intercepted. So I don't necessarily agree that Penn State's due for turnovers. If they turn the ball over this week, I wouldn't be shocked. But overall, I think the main feeling in this game is Iowa will get the better of Penn State's offense at points in this game. If Penn State only scores 13, 14 points in the first half, I don't know if any of us or anybody would be shocked. But I think as the game goes on, Penn State is going to be able to get enough chunk plays, get enough big plays, perhaps take advantage of some short field, some turnovers from the defense, and turn those into points. I know Penn State hasn't always turned turnovers into touchdowns this year. I know they haven't always converted red zone opportunities into touchdown, but they've only missed, I think, on one or two red zone opportunities total this year through 3 games. They're hitting on 86% of them for total in total. Do you guys, what is your level of concern of this Penn State offense against Iowa's defense? Anthony, I'll start with you.
Um, Not a ton of concern. The first thing that pops into my head when you bring this up, especially when talking about turnovers, is the weather forecast. And I don't know if we're planning on getting into that
Yeah,
much
no,
at
yeah.
all.
Let's talk. It's worth bringing up.
Yeah, but obviously, as many people, most of you probably know that are listening, especially the ones that plan on attending the game, there is a chance of rain in the forecast, varying from slight showers, very little, to
Oh,
a potential tropical storm rolling in. So no one really knows, depending on who you listen to or what you look at. You're seeing different things. So just pack accordingly, I guess. Wear a white poncho or a clear poncho to support the
yeah.
white.
It's
But
the rain is coming. It's just a matter: is it coming Saturday night or is it coming early Sunday morning? It just
yeah,
that's all that really. There's going to be a lot of rain at some point, and
yeah,
and if
exactly.
it comes Sunday morning, please drive safely, everybody. But as you were saying, with the rain,
Yeah, so I mean that could affect the potential for turnovers. Obviously,
sure,
remember the Northwestern game last year? That game was a
it was a game.
monsoon.
It was a game.
Yeah, there was football play. That's the best way I could describe it. But it was a brutally bad rainstorm, and there were like 9 turnovers in the game,
Penn State
five
had
from
five. Yeah, five
Northwestern had
fumbles.
4.
Yeah,
So yeah, if it rains a lot, this could end up being another really sloppy game where first to 20 wins. So Penn State's going to have to depending on regardless of how much rain actually shows up, Penn State's going to have to do a good job of protecting the football. And if
mm,
they can do that, I think that's their biggest recipe for success. Don't give Iowa's defense, turnovers or chances to, put their offense in really good field position where, you'd rather them have to drive 80, 90 yards where you don't really think that they can do that. So,
it's and Trace McSorley talked about this on the podcast that Christian Hagenberg and Brandon Bell do. Um, what the key about Iowa's defense is just not to force the big play. You have to be patient in letting the big play come to you. If you're Drew, you can't try to force a 40-yard bomb down the field if the play is not there. You have to take what Iowa gives you because they're an opportunistic defense. They're not going to do a lot of things special. They're not going to try to trick you or confuse you a ton. They're a pretty solid basic defense all around. But when you give them the opportunity to make a big play when you're trying to force something, they usually take advantage of those opportunities. So I mean, I 100% agree with you, Anthony, on that, and that's going to be the key for Drew on Saturday in the passing game is just not to force the big play. Um, that being said, Marty, what's your initial thoughts on Penn State's offense going up against this Iowa defense?
Um, yeah. Well, first off, I apologize to everyone because I've been battling the flu all week, and I'm starting to run low on the energy here. But no, I think the offense against the defense, you take care of the football. You guys mentioned take care of the football first and foremost because this Iowa defense is very opportunistic. They always have been. They always will be. I do think that this Iowa defensive line, similar to what we said about Iowa's offensive line, this is not what you typically think of an Iowa defensive line. You always, I mean, you can go back to Adrian Claiborne in the late 2000s and AJ Epineza and Van Ness, and just there's seemingly always somebody, and there just isn't this year. They don't have that dude, which I think
I,
benefits Penn State.
I do think Joe Evans could possibly be that dude for them.
I think he could get there, but he's not there yet.
Not there yet, but if there's going to be somebody who has that type of game this weekend, it would probably be him.
I agree. I
If
mean,
it's not obviously Cooper DeJean
I
in the
was gonna say,
back.
obviously Cooper DeJean's one of the best defensive backs in the country. You've got to be careful with him. But I don't. I'm not necessarily saying I'm going to predict it to happen, but there's no reason the 30-point streak can't continue this weekend
I
because I
agree.
think, and then now I do think part of that is I think Penn State's defense can just smother Iowa's offense, and in turn cause Iowa's defense to wear down as the game goes on. But yeah, just you know what you're going to get with Iowa. Phil Parker is one of the best defense coordinators in the country. Now I will say, Illinois gave Drew a lot of fits last week with man coverage. Iowa is a zone team. I'll be curious to see if that
Yeah.
can help him at all early in the game, getting into a rhythm. But with that, and I mentioned this earlier, that's where you've got to be careful with this Iowa zone defense against the zone defense like Iowa's. Tip balls and overthrows are going to be interceptions. We've seen it before, so you've got to be careful with that. But yeah, I think Penn State's offense is better than Iowa's defense. So
And
yeah, it's just, you take care of the ball, execute better than you did last week. Don't drop the football, and they'll be okay.
I mean, isn't it the stat that like Iowa? I always had a pick six for like every year for like a crazy streak of years here. I forget the exact stat, but yeah, and that comes back to this is they don't do a lot of things special or anything fancy. They're just a fundamentally sound defense. They do everything to a T. They dot their I's, they cross their T's. Wherever the ball is, you can guarantee there's going to be 2 to 3 Hawkeyes around them. The problem where Iowa usually gets beat is that, and again against teams of similar caliber, they're usually fine, but against your Ohio States, your Michigans, your Penn States, ultimately Iowa usually just doesn't have the athletes to go against these teams for all 4 quarters. They can do it for 2, 3 quarters, but it's those last 15 minutes that usually decide these types of games. And I think that's where Penn State has the advantage in this one, just with their athletes. Now, the big thing will be for Penn State's offense, of course, in the passing attack, is Harrison Wallace available this week? If Harrison Wallace is available, this is a much different passing attack than if he's not available. If he's not available, it gets a little bit sketchier for Penn State's passing game. But we talked about the Iowa tight ends against Penn State's linebackers. I think this is a matchup where Penn State can take advantage of Iowa's linebacker unit. It's a quality one, not great. It's a quality one, but let me pull up the stat from earlier this week when I wrote about it. Give me 1 second to find it right here. Let's see. All right. Of course, I can't find it now, but basically, what it was is that Iowa's linebacker unit this year has allowed receptions on about 80% or so. It may have been even 90% of passes targeted at the linebackers or who the linebackers are covering. Now, the yards total isn't terrible for how many catches it's been, but if you're Iowa and you're giving up 80-90% of the targets, if you're allowing 80% or 90% of the targets towards you to be completed against a Penn State linebacker room that's as talented as this one, that is a that's playing with fire if you're Iowa's linebackers and Iowa's defense in total as a whole, because this is a Penn State linebacker tight end room, jeez, that can make Iowa pay for just allowing that many passes to be completed over the course of a game. I wouldn't be shocked if it's a big day for the tight ends. We haven't seen them have a huge day yet. I think Saturday could be that day. How do you guys feel about that tight end room versus Iowa's linebackers? I'm going to try to find that stat as you guys go over it.
Yeah, I'll start on this one. I mean, they're due for a breakout performance. I mean, I've honestly
Okay.
been surprised that they haven't had it yet,
Okay.
especially Theo Johnson. Like they're so talented, and they've been such an integral part of this passing attack in the past. You got to figure eventually it's going to come. They haven't needed them just yet, and they've done a really good job in blocking, especially Theo Johnson. So, I think like I said, it's gonna happen. It's just a
Sure.
question of when is that breakout gonna happen.
So it is when quarterbacks are targeting Iowa linebackers this year, they've completed 15 and 19 passes for 138 yards. So I mean that's 78% completion percentage, and then 138 divided by 15 is about 9.2 yards per attempt. I mean, if you can average a first down by targeting the tight ends a ton in this game, Penn State's going to be in a really good spot to win and move the ball a lot offensively. Marty, thoughts on that matchup?
I just agree with everything I said. I think that you get the feeling the tight ends are due. I won't be surprised if we see it this week, see them expose the seams, especially with Theo Johnson. Really thought he'd be a bigger part of the offense thus far. But yeah, there's a few things on this offense I feel like are just due to finally click and explode. I'm not going to be surprised if that includes a big play down the seams to Theo Johnson on Saturday.
I think for Penn State to be successful in this game, they're going to have to prove early that they're willing to throw the ball quite a bit. Not a lot, but quite a bit against this Iowa offense. Because if not, Iowa's going to do what we saw Illinois do last week, which is, you know, stack the box, play heavy against that run game, try to slow down that run game. Because while Drew has shown a lot of nice things so far this year, I don't know if he's done enough where opposing defenses are fully respecting him just yet. They don't have to worry about him taking off. So I think Penn State's gonna have to use the deep ball a little bit this game. I wouldn't, try and, pick on that secondary a ton, especially with Cooper DeJean just chilling in that secondary, waiting for an opportunity. By the way, Cooper DeJean has not had a huge game yet this season. He's had quality ones, nothing huge. He's bound for a breakout performance at some time this year. Penn State better hope it's not Saturday because he is one of those guys who can change the course of a game in the secondary. But I think Penn State's going to have to take their fair amount of chances deep in this game. Um, Anthony, do you have any concerns about how Penn State's wide receiver room could come into this game, especially if Harrison Wallace III is not available?
I mean, yeah, you definitely have to have some concern after last week. There were some key drops in that game last week. They were just missing that big play threat, offensively in the passing game. I mean, Keandre Lambert Smith obviously has the potential to be that guy, but obviously the first 2 weeks were solid, and then last week was a little bit of a step back for him. So you need him to really emerge on the scene and be that guy. And then you need somebody else to really emerge on the scene and be a consistent presence.
Yeah.
It seems like they're doing a little bit of a rotation every week where like maybe one or two guys like step up and have a decent game, but no one's really taken the mantle of that third guy. And we talked about this on Sunday after the Illinois game as well. So I don't want to be a broken record here, but yeah, obviously if Trey Wallace isn't out there, you do have a little bit of concern about the passing game and what they can accomplish because Trey has really been like a safety blanket for Drew. He's
Yeah.
been a guy that you look to. He was consistent. Um, he was a good complement to KLS, and I think without that, I think Iowa can really key in on stopping Keandre Lambert Smith and these tight ends and just daring somebody else to step up and beat you.
And I think that's where the tight ends come back into play as well. If that tight end room can have a solid day, be a threat, be a presence, that'll open up more opportunities for the other wide receivers, especially if Harrison Wallace III is not available. Um, Marty, thoughts on the Penn State wide receiver room entering this game, going up against, again, a fundamentally sound secondary in Iowa. Iowa usually has pretty damn good secondaries.
I think Anthony, I feel, you really want Trey Wallace back. I think you almost need Trey Wallace back. We saw last week how important he is to this offense. And you need to get a little more consistency out of Keandre Lambert Smith yet. I mean, I felt like the first 2 weeks, he was just continuing to pick up with where he left off at last season. Took a step back last week, if you want to call it that. It just seemed to be a lot of the old KLS of getting in your head, a dumb penalty. Just got to be cleaner this week from the receivers. I will say I am intrigued and would like to see some more of Caden Saunders, though.
Sure.
I know we touched on this on Sunday, but boy, it sure felt like he had a lot more than 2 catches
Yeah.
against Illinois, didn't it? So I would like to see more of Caden Saunders, especially if Amari Evans is still banged up. But yeah,
I
I still think the receiver room ultimately things are going to be okay because I think there's enough talent there.
sure.
You just got to clean the drops up, and I think they'll be all right.
I wouldn't be shocked if Malik McLean has a bounce back performance this week. It seems like they still have a lot of confidence in him despite last week. Obviously, he's also a great special teams present for Penn State. He's won their special teams player of the week honor twice already. But I mean, I think they see the potential in him, and I think if Penn State's gonna be a Big Ten contender this year, they need a third guy, but I think the most likely option for that third guy this year is McLean. So I wouldn't be shocked if we see a heavy dose, not a heavy, but a good dose of Malik McLean this week as well. Um, I guess what I keep coming back to is if Iowa is able to shut down this Penn State Russian attack, do we trust Drew in this scenario to have a strong enough performance, his fourth career start against a good defense? Do we trust Drew to be able to have a good enough game against this Iowa secondary to win the game? Um, thoughts on that, Anthony? Just if the rushing game can't get going, how would you feel about how this Penn State passing attack in general uh, has a chance against this Iowa defense?
I mean, I think Drew is capable. I mean, it'll be interesting, especially if it rains. It'll be interesting to see how they approach the passing attack because obviously, I feel like it's been pretty conservative for the most part. You haven't really seen Drew, try to take the top off a
Oh, I
defense.
mean that West Virginia play on the fourth play of the game, but Delaware they didn't really have to do it, and then last week he we didn't see it because Penn State just couldn't get the passing game going.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely seems like they've gone more conservative. And like you said, I feel like they'll do the same this week, especially considering the way Iowa likes to play defense. Their main goal is to take away the big play. And Drew seems pretty content to just take what the defense gives him. He doesn't seem like the type that forces the ball into, places that, there isn't anything there to begin
Yeah,
with.
he's not chasing the big play.
Yeah, exactly. So, I think he'd be fine in that regard. He did it pretty well last week because the run game it wasn't spectacular until maybe like the second half
Yeah,
where it finally came alive. So you know I think he'll weather the storm, no pun intended, and I think he'll be okay.
I just ask because I don't see this being a game where Penn State's running backs average like 6 yards per carry. I think there's going to be stretches where Iowa shuts down the Penn State rushing attack. I think there's going to be stretches where Penn State, gets a couple big plays on the ground. But I mean, at the same time, this isn't a Penn State rushing game that we've seen have a ton of big plays this year. Yeah, they have not had that explosiveness. There's been opportunities that the running backs have missed, but we just haven't seen that explosiveness yet. Perhaps that comes this week. Um, Marty, if Penn State has to rely on the passing game this weekend to win, how does that make you feel? Do you think this is how does it make you feel in general? I guess.
I mean, I would be more concerned, honestly, about the receivers than Drew.
Sure.
I have no doubts Drew can do it. It's just the receivers got to catch the ball, which really hadn't been an issue until the Illinois game. So,
Sure.
I mean, it's probably more of just being fresh on the mind with that. But I do wonder too. You guys mentioned not a lot of deep shots or big chunk plays in the passing game yet. But I also wonder how much of it is Mike Yurcich to an extent sandbagging things, considering they played an FCS squad and two Power Five teams at Penn State was just clearly head and shoulders above.
Yep.
And he knew he didn't really need to open too many things up and put too much on film. So I wonder how much of it might be that also. So I think that's something to take in consideration as well. Yes, the chunk plays, the explosive plays haven't been there, but they also haven't needed them. So
Sure.
I wonder how much that factors in that they just simply didn't need them. So they're not going to go that route. They're not going to put that on tape until they need to.
All right. We talked about the one factor being weather. There's a couple other factors here we should consider before we get into our picks. One, sticking on the offensive side of things. Mike Yurcich, last time he faced his Iowa defense was thanks thanks to the execution, but his play calling was just shredding this Iowa defense for an entire half until Sean Clifford got hurt, and then Taquan Roberson just uh, to no fault of his own, he just wasn't good enough in that game for Penn State. He didn't have the experience or anything that was needed to win that type of game. Um, Based off what we've seen Yurcich do in his short sample size against Iowa in the past, does that make you feel any better about how this Penn State offense can move the ball, Anthony, against this Iowa defense?
I'm sorry, I missed the question. Repeat that one more time.
Based off what Mike, what we okay, last time these two teams played, not last time, 2 years ago when they played in Iowa City. I guess that was last time. Um, Mike Yurcich's play calling, thanks to the execution, was shredding the Iowa defense for that first half. Penn State was on their way to scoring 40
Mm.
points in that game before Sean Clifford got hurt. We know what happened next. Does that, albeit short sample size, make you feel any better about what this Penn State offense can do this week? Obviously, there's other factors like the rain that could be involved, and Iowa, has that experience against Jurcic, but does that give you any extra confidence about what Penn State's offense can do this week? Because I mean, Phil Parker's one of the best DCs in the game. Jurcic is one of the better OCs in the game, one of the best, and he was getting the better of Phil Parker for that first half before Clifford's injury.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely makes you feel a little better. Because I mean, yeah, I remember when you think back to that game, Clifford. Obviously, he made those. He made one boneheaded throw at the beginning of the game, and then he was dominating, until he got hurt.
Yeah,
So, yeah, they're very different teams, so it's hard to
sure,
compare.
sure,
It's kind of comparing apples to oranges. Like that Iowa defense was probably even slightly better than the defense they have now.
exactly.
So
I think for me it would be Jurcic obviously has a great idea of how to attack this Iowa zone defense because as we said before, much of what we say about Iowa's defense today could be said same about the Iowa defense 5 years ago and the Iowa defense 5 years from now. It's almost all the same. They're not going to do anything special. They're going to run most of the same plays. Now they're going to run most of the same things Penn State saw 5 years ago. So
yeah, no, like you said, the Iowa defense is very consistent. It doesn't change very much. It's just new faces, but the same scheme, and I think Penn State knows that. So I think but I think Iowa is really going to focus on running the ball, but that's getting off topic. I
yeah,
think, like you said, to bring it back to what you were talking about, I think Yurcich will maybe open up the playbook a little bit more if the weather allows him to, and that should allow Penn State to have some success moving the ball.
sure. Marty, thoughts on your such verse Iowa's defense?
Yeah, that 2021 game, as good as Phil Parker is, Mike Yurcich was coaching circles around
Yeah,
him until Sean Clifford got hurt. And, the play Clifford got hurt on, if he has an extra half second in the pocket, he hits Brenton Strange for what's probably a touchdown. And it's 21-3 instead of 17-3. And that alone, even if Clifford still exits the game, probably wins that thing for Penn State. But I'm with you. I think if not for the Clifford injury, Penn State may have hung 40 on Iowa at Kinnick Stadium that day. And I don't think Mike Yurcich has forgotten that. And I think Mike Yurcich is going to have that was something to prove this weekend. I think a lot of members of this coaching staff, starting with James Franklin, even though he would never admit it, are out to prove something. I think they're salty. I think they're angry. Not just that they lost 2 years ago, not just how they lost with the Sean Clifford injury, but the actions and the comments of Iowa fans, of Kirk Ferentz, of that special teams coordinator flopping around on the ground like a toddler having a hissy fit, mocking PJ Mustafer, who just tore his ACL and honestly derailed his entire football career. Um, so I don't think it'll be just Mike Yurcich. Who's
This was my next factor. So keep
yeah.
going.
I understand. I don't think it's going to be just Mike Yurcich who's going to be out to try and prove something this weekend as a coach on Penn State sideline. We have seen James Franklin do it before when he's not happy with a previous result, with a coaching staff, with things that have been said. If he can put the pedal to the floor, he will do it. And
Yep.
I'm not necessarily saying he'll have the chance to do that Saturday night, but if this thing's 24-6, 30-6, whatever it is in the fourth quarter, I don't think Penn State slows down offensively. I think James would love to stick it to them. And again, I don't even think it's that they lost or how they lost. I think it has more to do with Kirk Ferentz and the I smell a rat and all that nonsense after the game 2 years ago that I'm very confident they've had this one circled for a while.
I get the general sense that most people have in college football have a general, big respect for Kirk Ferentz for what he's done at Iowa. But at the same time, I don't think Kirk Ferentz has many friends. He just doesn't seem like that type of guy.
It seems like he's a guy that people may respect what he's done, but you never really hear many people say nice things about him.
Yeah.
Like, you look at the way people used to talk about Bobby Bowden or Joe Paterno or just the people who've been around forever. If Frank Beamer, like you never hear that about Kirk Ferentz, Nick Saban, like you don't hear it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, you talked about that factor, and I'll kind of lead that into the third factor. And Anthony, I'll let you have the floor for this third factor. Or I guess maybe the fourth factor. I don't know anymore. But that, with the coaching staff as well, is something to note. But I want to tie that into not only is that going to be on the minds of the coach, on the minds of the coaching staff. I don't think the coach staff is going to go out there and be like, oh, we gotta shove this down their throat because of what happened 2 years ago. They're going to go out there and just coach their game. But if the opportunities arise that Penn State can lay it on them, I think they do. But I don't think the goal is let's go out and kick ass because of what happened 2 years ago. Penn State's just trying to go in there and win this week. They don't care how it's done. If they can do it in that style, so be it. But for the fans, it's much different. For the fans have in mind 2 years ago what happened, everything Marty mentioned, and it's already a whiteout crowd. You add that into the whiteout crowd, it's not going to add a whole much more, but it's going to give a little bit of an extra oomph to this crowd. I mean, I know these two teams aren't quote unquote rivals, but when we're talking about the closest things there are to rivals for Penn State in the Big Ten, it is Ohio State, it is Michigan. They kind of try to make the Michigan State thing. You could kind of say Michigan State when D'Antonio was there because there's definitely some bad, blood between those two then. But Penn State, Iowa, no matter who the coaching staffs have been at Penn State, this has always been great entertainment football. Horrible for the fans because I'm sure fans just take heart attacks every game, literally and figuratively. Not trying to make light of those type of situations, but these two teams don't do fans any favor in these games. They're always weird scores, 6-4, 21-19. They all have, no matter what, it's always going to be a weird game. There are always going to be weird twists and turns. So, I mean, this is, to a degree, one of the closest things to a rival on Penn State's schedule outside of Ohio State and Michigan. So I think that's going to also add to the whiteout crowd. But, Anthony, how much do you think this whiteout crowd is going to factor in on Saturday night? Obviously, guys like Cade McNamara, Eric all have been there. But we talked about Iowa having to play two freshman running backs, rely on some inexperienced tight ends. I mean, for a lot of guys, this is going to be the biggest and loudest crowd they ever play in front of for Iowa. Do you think it always helps Penn State, but how much of a factor do you think it helps Penn State this week?
Yeah, I mean like you said, the whiteout crowd is always a factor. I mean, it's kept Penn State in some really competitive games that in the past they probably had no business being in or even winning. So you ask any former player on an opposing Big Ten team what was the toughest environment they ever played in, and they all say the whiteout without any hesitation.
Sure.
So it definitely adds something. It's definitely an intimidating environment. With that being said, you talked about how Cade McNamara and Eric All are guys that have played in a tough Penn State environment before. I'm not sure how much it's going to affect those guys,
And
just because,
with Cade
especially
being the quarterback, that's big.
yeah, especially for Cade, like he's played in the college football playoff, like he's been in big moments. So I'm not necessarily, thinking that it's going to rattle him too much per se, but yeah, for some of those younger guys, especially, the running backs or some of those guys on defense, it absolutely could play a part and it could absolutely, help Penn State. And you mentioned that bad blood, between Penn State and Iowa from 2 years ago, that's only going to ramp up the crowd even more. These fans, we don't forget. Like, we don't forget when those things happen. We carried those things with us, and that's just going to fuel the crowd on Saturday night to be, even louder and try to create even more chaos.
Yeah, and I mean, and I even on top of that, what's going to add to this crowd is you go back to that West Virginia game. Anthony, you were in the stands. That place was rocking. I mean, it rocks before whiteouts, but I never felt the press box shake before a whiteout as much as it shook before that West Virginia game. And I think that what a lot of that has, and now West Virginia you can say is an old rivalry game, but let's be honest, at least 50% of the people in that stadium weren't alive the last two time those two teams faced off. But what's added to this year's crowds, I think, is the expectations this team has. The expectations in State College, among the students, among the fans, and everybody in that stadium is that this Penn State team can compete for a Big Ten championship and maybe a college football playoff. If they get to a national championship, everything's on the table at that point. But the expectations is that this team can be something special, and I think that just added more to the crowds this year. And it's just gonna every crowd is gonna be insane this year, especially if they keep winning. I mean, we're looking way ahead. They have to beat Iowa this week. They would have to beat Ohio State, but God forbid Penn State's undefeated going up against an undefeated Michigan team in November. That may be the most ruckus crowd in Beaver Stadium history, and that's going to be a noon kickoff. I
Have
mean,
you seen the small side? Have you seen the prices for the Penn State Michigan game right now?
I haven't, but I'm going to guess it's 400 at least.
Well, I haven't seen like the nosebleeds, but I've seen like 50-yard line. If you want 50-yard line tickets right now, it's like $950 a pop.
I mean,
Like
at
it, if it's undefeated, that if both teams are undefeated, it'll go up. If they're not, obviously that'll go down a little bit. But still, that is absolutely insane.
yeah, I mean, this is one of the biggest years in Penn State football history. Let's be honest. Let's call it what it is. This year, next year are two of the biggest years in Penn State football history because of the talent that's on this team, because of the type of quarterback Penn State has, and that's no disrespect to Trace. That's no disrespect to Sean. That's no disrespect to any of the quarterbacks of those great 2000s teams. Drew is the best pure quarterback Penn State has had on paper since Kerry Collins and that 1994 team. And the expectations because of that are certainly high. And we'll see what Penn State can do, but they have to focus first, of course, on being Iowa this week. But I think that whiteout crowd, because of the expectations, because of what happened 2 years ago, is going to be even more insane this week in all four quarters. Going back to weather quickly, the weather just popped up on my TV forecast for Saturday. So Saturday afternoon, tailgating wise, it's gonna be terrible. It's gonna be terrible weather to tailgate. It's just gonna be raining all afternoon. But as we get towards kickoff, it looks like it's gonna go more towards that spotty showers. We're gonna see showers here and there, but it doesn't look like it's gonna be consistent rain at that point based off the radar. So I mean, it may be a little bit of both worlds, as we were saying. It may be a little bit of a lot of rain during the day, but if it's only a little bit of rain at kickoff or throughout the game, that certainly helps Penn State's chances on Saturday. I think that's all the factors I had. Whiteout, coach and staff, Yurcich versus that defense, the weather. I think that's all we got there. I think it's time for predictions, guys. I mean, let's get into it. I have one for if it's a heavy rain and one if it's a light rain. If you guys want to do both, go ahead. If you just want to do one, feel free. Perhaps your score really doesn't change it. For me, my score changes a little bit. Um, all right, I'll just go first. If it's a light rain on Saturday, I think Penn State has a chance to not only score 30 plus, keep that streak alive. I think Penn State has a chance to put up 40 points against this Iowa defense. Not because I don't think highly of the Iowa defense. I just don't think Iowa's going to be able to move the ball consistent enough against this Penn State defense. I think Penn State's defense gets some turnovers or forces some good field position off, pinning Iowa deep in their own side of the field. I think Penn State's going to get some nice field position in this game. They're going to take advantage of that, whether it's field goals or touchdowns. If it's a light rain, give me Penn State 34-13. If it's a game where the rain's going to factor in a little bit more, I still think Penn State wins big. I still think they cover. And that would be like a 24-6 game. But if I'm doing an official prediction, give me Penn State 34, Iowa 13. Whoever wants to go next.
Yeah, I'll take it. I'll just do the one prediction because I don't think it's gonna change a ton. Maybe a touchdown,
Yeah.
7 to 10 points comes off the board
Yeah.
if there's rain. But
That was,
I
yeah.
so I'm gonna go. I actually don't think it's a very high I don't think it's a super high scoring game regardless. I'm gonna say Penn State 27, Iowa. I'll go 27-10.
27-10.
I think the 30-point streak ends. Like I think Iowa's defense plays, just conservatively enough, and their offense is just conservative enough to prevent Penn State from cracking 30. But I still think that still has Penn State winning and covering. But that also has the under hitting for those of you who are big betters. So 27-10.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll also just go with the one because I think ultimately with the style of play Iowa wants to play, it's not going to make that big of a difference. I think, as I said earlier, I think the 30-point streak can continue in this game. I'm not going to predict it to, but I'm not going to be surprised if it does. I don't think Penn State covers, although I think they win by double digits, and the under will hit. I'm going to say 24-13. Penn State gets out of there with a comfortable 11-point victory. And I think it could be one of those where they win by 11, but you never at any point feel like this game is in any doubt or in any danger because you never at any point feel like Iowa's offense is capable of doing anything. And just one other thing I'm going to add,
Sure.
you guys mentioned the rivalry, which I agree. And I am a firm believer that on both ends of this spectrum, from Penn State fans and Iowa, the amount of hatred that exists between these two programs in wrestling with the
Sure.
fan base spills over to football, and I think that's a real thing. And I truly believe, I truly believe that contributes to this because I would agree. I think Penn State's number one rivalry in the Big Ten is Iowa if you take it across the board. And I think that's because of both football and wrestling. And now I'm the wrestling guy of the three on here, so maybe that's part of why I feel that way. But I definitely think the hatred between the two programs in wrestling spills over to the football programs with the fans.
I guess the last thing I really have on this is if Iowa's going to win this game, I think it's going to take two things. One, they're going to have to be able to run the ball and control that time of possession by quite a bit. And I think they're going to need to force 3 or 4 Penn State turnovers. I don't think they're going to do either of those ultimately, and I think that's why I think Penn State is probably going to pull out a double-digit victory here. But we'll see how it goes. But so we all pick Penn State. We all pick Penn State to win by double digits. Me and Anthony have Penn State covered. Marty has Penn State narrowly missing that cover. Penn State is 3-0 against the spread this year, I think. So that is worth noting. Okay, quickly, we'll do our Big Ten picks and then get into our recruiting. For the video on YouTube, everybody's going to see this in one episode. But for our podcast listeners, we're going to break the recruiting one into a second episode just to break it up a little bit. Marty is, I think still here, just has his camera off for a second. But Anthony, I'll start with you here. If Marty comes back in time, great. If not, we'll come back to him when he gets back. Anthony, Wisconsin -5 on the road against Purdue. Who do you like here? I personally like Wisconsin to win this game. I just don't think Purdue's very good this year.
I'm with you. Give me the Badgers. I'm not really impressed by either team to start the year, but I feel like Purdue just is not the same team after losing Aiden O'Connell and Chuck Sizzle and all those guys.
Sure.
So give me Wisconsin to win and cover.
All right, Marty, Wisconsin -5 versus Purdue. Who do you got? You're muted.
My bad. Yeah, same thing. Wisconsin winning the covers. I think this Purdue team is absolutely terrible.
All right, Rutgers versus Michigan. Rutgers a 24.5 point favorite. This is a tough one. We've been talking about this one all week. But give me Michigan. I think it may be. I think Rutgers may cover for the most part, but I think ultimately Michigan gets a late touchdown or two that puts it away spread wise.
I'm actually going to take obviously Michigan to win. I'm not crazy, but give me Rutgers to cover in this one. I don't know why. I just have a feeling that they're just going to keep it close. I feel like Rutgers has a history of keeping it decently close with Michigan, at least through like halftime. So give me Rutgers to cover 24 and a half.
All right, Marty.
Yeah, I thought about taking Rutgers to cover, but they can't throw the football at all. Gavin Wimsatt sucks. Their receivers belong in the MAC. Michigan will cover. If I was betting, and actually I am betting the under here. Get the under. I feel comfortable in, but yeah, I think Michigan wins this thing something ugly like 28 or 30 or so to 6. So give me Michigan.
FAU versus Illinois. Illinois a 15.5 point favorite. Give me the Illini. I think they bounced back from that loss to Penn State last week. I think Luke Altmaier is not as bad as he looked last week. I think he's going to be able to have a decent season overall. Give me the Illini to cover.
Illinois to win, Illinois to cover.
Same. Illinois wins this one easy.
All right, Maryland a 7.5 point favorite on the road against Michigan State. I don't know what to make of this Michigan State team at this point. I think they have the potential to win a couple more games this year, but this was already a team that was going to struggle to get to bowl eligibility. Now, with everything that's gone on, I just don't know what's going to happen. And one thing to watch for is once Mel Tucker officially gets fired, he's gotten his notice that he's going to be terminated. But once he's officially fired, that 30-day transfer portal window opens up, and that's when we can see players leave that Michigan State program. So it may be worse before it gets better for Michigan State. That'll be a very interesting coaching hire, by the way, to watch this offseason. But give me Maryland to cover against Michigan State here.
Yeah, I just have a hard time betting on Michigan State to do anything the rest of the year, especially with everything going on. Even if this wasn't going on, I'd still be tempted to take Maryland to win and cover. So give me Maryland to win and cover.
I do think no Mel Tucker probably adds a 2 or 3 points here to the spread, but I mean, I would agree with you, Anthony. Marty.
Yeah, give me Maryland. I think they're a good team. I think Michigan State is going to just absolutely tank the rest of the way. There are two teams in the Big Ten. We'll get to the other one here shortly that I feel like I could bet against in every game the rest of the year and make a lot of money. Michigan State's one of the two. Give me the Terps.
All right, La Tech at Nebraska. Nebraska 20.5 point favorite here at home after coming off their first win of the year. Give me the Cornhuskers to win and cover first, or win for a second straight week and cover that near 3 touchdown spread.
I mean, I'll take Nebraska to win and cover, but like we talked about before we went live here, like your gut tells you, oh yeah, Nebraska should cover that easily. But would anybody be shocked if they didn't cover? Like probably not. Just with this Nebraska team, it's just a mixed bag. You don't know what you're going to get on a week to week basis. But
Yeah.
I'll trust them here because I don't know much about Louisiana Tech. So give me them to win and cover.
Marty.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. Like, I'm going to pick Nebraska to win and cover, but it's Nebraska. They're terrible. I think Matt Rule's a bad coach. I won't be surprised if they don't cover, but Louisiana Tech's just awful.
All right. I'm gonna save the Ohio State Notre Dame game for last. Akron versus Indiana. Indiana 17-point favorite. Give me Indiana to cover this one. Everybody loves Joe Moorhead, but this Akron team is pretty bad. So I think Indiana covering 17 is almost easy money.
Yep, Indiana wins. Indiana covers. Next question.
Minnesota versus. Oh, sorry, Marty.
Sorry, Marty.
Yeah, sorry. No, I mean I would love to see the Fighting Jomos cover, but yeah, I think Indiana defense is actually halfway decent.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure Akron gets more than like 3 points against them. So yeah, I think Indiana covers this pretty easily.
Minnesota versus Northwestern. Minnesota 11.5 point favorite. Um, Minnesota's offense hasn't looked great. Darius Taylor, their freshman running back, is outstanding though. Um, if they could run the ball, they should be able to put up 20 something in this game. And I don't think Northwestern gets 10. So uh, give me Minnesota to cover.
Yep, give me Minnesota just because Northwestern just, I mean, they're just a decimated
There's
team right now, aren't
there's
they?
not much there. No,
Yeah,
feel bad.
so
Feel bad for that program. Uh,
I do too. But yeah, give me Minnesota to win and cover.
Yeah, Northwestern's the other team in the Big Ten. I feel like I could bet against every week the rest of the year, make a lot of money. They're awful. They're probably the worst Power Five team. I don't think there's a single G5 conference they would win. Give me the Gophers.
all right, and then the game of the week in the Big Ten. Penn State Iowa was pretty good, but the game of the week is Ohio State versus Notre Dame. Top 10 matchup here um, in South Bend. Um, Ohio State, 3 point favorite here. That line started at like -7 Ohio State, I think, and it's shifted all the way down to Ohio State by a field goal. I've been going back and forth who I think wins this game. I think Notre Dame could very well pull the upset here on Saturday, but I think I just trust Ryan Day and this Ohio State team a little bit more. Um, Kyle McCord showed a lot of good last week. They looked a lot better last week than they did the first 2 weeks. I don't think that's a surprise. I think they were sandbagging it for the better part for the first 2 weeks. And then this last week, knowing that there's a bigger game coming up, they kind of had to, you know, kick it into gear again, ready for Notre Dame. And I don't think it's going to be a terribly high scoring game, but I think Ohio State wins and covers.
Yeah, I wouldn't touch that -3 line if I was putting money down. That's basically a pick 'em at that point in this game. Um, give me, I'll take Ohio State at that line though to win and cover if I had to make a guess right now. But I would not be surprised if Notre Dame ended up winning this game. I think they're a really good team this year, and I think Sam Hartman's a really good quarterback.
Absolutely. All right. And Marty, before you peace out, what is your pick for Ohio State Notre Dame?
Yeah, I think the Buckeyes win this. I wouldn't bet it if I had to. I'd take Ohio State. I'm not gonna be surprised if Notre Dame wins it, but ultimately, I still think Ohio State's the better team. I think they started to figure some things out last week against Western Kentucky offensively. Give me the Buckeyes. I think they get it done in South Bend this weekend, and they are also on full steam ahead towards an undefeated matchup with the Nittany Lions in a couple of weeks in Columbus.
All right. Well, as Marty goes and feels better, me and Anthony will break down a couple notable recruits on campus this weekend. And all right, everybody, welcome back into the Penn State 365 podcast. If you're on YouTube, we are probably doing this in one video, so don't mind this. But this is for our podcast listeners. As we said in the last episode, we were going to split our recruiting bit into a little bit of a second episode just to split up the two podcasts. So without further ado, let's get into the recruiting aspect of this on Saturday, Anthony. And we have about a list of 10 names to get into. And yeah, let's just dive right into it. This is a good list, Anthony, to say the least. We only highlighted about 10 guys here. But, I mean, overall, this list for Penn State is going to be the best that they have this season, no doubt. just what's your initial thoughts based off what we've confirmed over there at Happy Valley Insider? I mean, there are a couple really big names here, to say the least, and we'll
Yeah,
break down some.
yeah, I'll let you get into those names after I give my thoughts, but it's easy to say this every year because the whiteout list of recruits is usually really, really good
Yeah,
and obviously the best list of the year for obvious reasons. I mean, the whiteout at this point has kind of transcended Penn State. It's kind of one of the, when you think about college football on a grand scale, one of the first things you think of as a college football fan is the whiteout. I mean, the pageantry, the tradition of it, the atmosphere that it provides. Unless you've been to one and been in it, like you don't get it. And then once you've been to them, you understand it. It's different, and I think recruits understand that, and they make it a must-see game. And this is definitely one of the best lists that I've seen so far in terms of it being a who's who of recruits that Penn State is going after. And obviously, you know, it's not a complete list yet. Like, there'll be more kids that are added throughout the week and leading up to kickoff. So it's really good right now, and it's only going to get better.
absolutely. Let's talk about some of these names. Starting the 2024 recruiting class, since we're still in the midst of that cycle. The two big names here, Jalen Harvey, the defensive end out of Maryland, and Ernest Willer, also out of Maryland. Um, I mean, though, Willer could be a DT, could be a defensive end in the next level. We'll figure it out over the next few months here. But Jalen Harvey, that's the big one. That's the big fish. I mean, uh, another one in the 2025 class that's a big fish. Bryce Underwood is also on campus. But if we're talking about the most important recruit for Penn State on campus this weekend, it is without a doubt Jalen Harvey.
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody who follows recruiting knows about Jalen Harvey's recruitment
We
at this
talk
point.
about it a ton.
Obviously, we talked about him so much to the point that it's like you're kind of over talking about it.
Yeah.
But it's been over a year probably at this point of Penn State recruiting him, and Penn State was the leader early and stayed the leader for a long time, and it's wavered a little bit. So we'll see if Penn State can recapture that momentum. This weekend. It's probably between Penn State and USC right now. Maryland is
Yeah.
hanging around as a
Yeah.
dark horse,
Yeah.
but it's definitely Penn State USC at the moment. So he was at USC a few weeks ago for the San Jose State
He's
game, I
been out there a
believe.
few times recently.
He has, yes. And I believe he was at Maryland last week for the Virginia game, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
So,
Maryland's
he's
hanging around.
Maryland's hanging around, but Penn State has an opportunity this weekend, and that's the point. So if they can recapture that momentum, that would be huge.
I think Maryland is dangerous just in this recruitment, just in the fact that they are they are that middle ground.
Hmm.
It's close to home. They have good NI. They have a decent NIL. It seems, based off what I know. Um, and sometimes you see when a kid is torn between two schools, and there's a third school kind of hanging around. It's sometimes that third school that swoops in as the big winner. So
The Nick Cross effect.
exactly. So I mean, we'll see what happens here, but I do agree that I think it's Penn State USC at top, and this is going to be a nail biter all the way till Jalen Harvey sends in his letter of intent in December, or if he waits until February, we'll see. But it's gonna be very interesting to see how this one plays out. But big chance for Penn State to get momentum back on their side this weekend with Harvey. Our future cast for him to Penn State have been in for almost a year. So I mean, like you said, this one's been going on for a long time, and it just never has gone to that finish line. It's not going to get to the finish line probably this week. I'd be absolutely shocked, but um, big opportunity for Penn State on the recruiting trail this weekend. Ernest Willard, uh, a kid who could be a DT or DE. He was down at IMG. He is now back up north in Maryland. Um, Very interesting recruitment. It's hard to get a grasp of where this one's headed, but I think if Penn State does make a push here for Willer over the next few months, they have a good chance of winning this recruitment. And he does seem to like the university. But I mean, this is a kid who hasn't taken any official visits yet. There's still a lot to be played out in this recruitment. It's hard to make any sort of prediction or say any strong feelings about it just because it's been so quiet.
Yeah, I mean, no one knows the specifics. It seems like there are some things
There's
holding
question
back.
marks.
Yeah, there's things holding back the recruitment of Willer. I'll just leave it at that. But yeah, obviously the talent is there. The talent's always been there for Willer. Obviously he's a little bit of a tweener. Could be a D end, could be a D tackle, and he hasn't taken any official visits, and this won't be an official visit to my
Nope.
knowledge.
Yep, this is an
So
unofficial.
yeah, the interest in Penn State is definitely there. So
Sure.
it'll from Willer's end. So it'll just depend on how Penn State views him as a prospect and if they decide that they want to pursue. If they do, I think this is one they could definitely win.
Yeah, I 100%. I think, and Willer. I mean, yes, there's question marks, but this is a kid who's very highly regarded around the industry. I mean, top 100 kid here on Rivals, number two kid in the state of Maryland, one of the top 10 defensive ends in the country, or defensive end, defense tackles, whatever he's going to be. Other schools in his, you know, not finalists, but top group in South Carolina, Miami, Notre Dame, Maryland, Ohio State, Auburn, and of course Penn State. So a long ways to go here, but big one for Penn State. Going to 2025, a couple of kids here that are definitely worth pointing out. Let's start with the big one. Bryce Underwood, top quarterback in the nation in that 2025 recruiting class. I don't think Penn State has a great chance of ultimately winning this recruitment, but hey, getting him on campus is a big win for Penn State alone. Perhaps you build some momentum in this recruitment. Perhaps Drew has a big season from here on out that opens up his eyes, opens up other quarterbacks' eyes. If Drew can have that type of season, perhaps they could gain some positive momentum with Underwood. Right now, it definitely seems like Michigan is one of the leaders here, if not the leader, and is probably would be the quote unquote betting favorite. But long way to go here. Don't think Penn State ultimately is going to be the team here, but I think it's notable that Penn State is going to visit here, and perhaps this results in an official visit down the road.
Yeah, obviously, anytime you can get the number one player in the country on campus, you're gonna do it, whether you have a good chance at landing him or not. As the old saying goes, you can't win the raffle if you don't buy a ticket,
Yep.
and that's exactly how I would describe, Bryce Underwood coming to campus here. You never know, the whiteout, kids. There's been kids before that have, gone to the whiteout just because they wanted to see the whiteout environment, didn't think they
Sure.
were gonna fall in love with Penn State or anything, and next thing you know, they end up in the class off of that whiteout visit. You just never know what can happen. That's the
Yep.
point. You get to get on campus, you never know how it could turn out. So, obviously, you said Michigan's a big contender there. I
Yeah.
think LSU is probably, right in step with
Yep.
Michigan in terms of leaders. And then, of course, you got Deion Sanders lurking in this one
Yep.
as well at Colorado. You can never count out Deion in any recruitment. So, he has a long way to go. Obviously he's going to be courted by the best schools in the country.
The who's who.
So
Yep.
let's see what happens.
Yeah, Penn State definitely has a far uphill climb, but just getting him on campus is a big one. Um, Staying at quarterback, Malik Washington out of Archbishop Spalding in Maryland. Um, Huge 6'5" quarterback, top 250 player on Rivals, number 16 quarterback in the country, pro style. Um, this is a kid who's been to Penn State a ton. This is one of their top quarterback targets in that 2025 recruiting class. Um, this is a big visit for Penn State. Washington's one of those guys that we're definitely watching from the outside here of being potentially that quarterback in the class for Penn State. I think you could throw in Ryan Montgomery. Ryan Montgomery as well there for the Nittany Lions in this class. We'll see what happens, but Washington definitely a big name to know this week.
Yeah, I mean, he checks all the boxes in terms of the potential 2025 quarterback for Penn State. I mean, he's a local kid. I think he's Archbishop Spalding in Maryland.
Yep.
So he's a pretty local kid in Penn State's recruiting footprint. Big body, great arm, the type of kid that Mike Yursich likes to recruit, and a
Yep.
very talented player. So, it's big to continue to get him back on campus, and we'll see down the road if this has a big impact in terms of sealing the deal.
Absolutely. Let's move to the running back position. 2025 running back, Tikwe Hayes. Apologies for the mispronunciation. Either way, the Alquipia running back, one of the top running backs in the country, 20th running back in country according to Rivals, 217 national, four-star prospect, set to announce a commitment on Monday. That definitely raises some eyebrows when he's going to be on campus on Saturday. I may have a future casting for Penn State there. Not sure there's really a ton to add here besides that he's committed on Monday and he's making an unofficial visit on Saturday. Anything to add, Anthony, on Hayes? Very good running
Yeah,
back. Very good running back.
yeah, no, we could talk about him a little bit more, next week if
He
I
does.
should
If
if slash when he does in fact commit to Penn
I
State.
would be surprised if he doesn't.
Yes, obviously it sounds you're not the only one with the commitment or not commitment, a prediction. So it seems like
Yes.
a very very high chance that he will announce for Penn State on Monday. So we'll see what happens there. But
Another four star. If so, another four-star running back for Cider.
exactly, second one in the class already. Usually you have a two running back class, so we could talk a little bit more about that after the fact. But he would be a very nice pickup.
He would
Nice
be.
and
Um, yeah, and it definitely seems like the writing is on the wall there with a commitment date just 2 days after a potential visit. So we'll see if that does happen. Sometimes, we've been surprised before. I mean, I remember, was it Trayon Webb last year who everybody thought was going to Penn State, and then on his commitment day, picked Florida. Now, he was a Florida kid, but things can always happen in this industry, and that's why we love it. All right, next big visitor, four-star defensive tackle Trent Wilson, currently at St. Francis Academy in Baltimore, top 100 prospect in the country, 88th nationally, top 3 kid in Maryland, top 10 defensive end. He's ranked as defensive end. I think he may end up as a DT at the next level. Either way, huge visitor in that 2025 class for Penn State here. One of their top targets, somebody who can be a huge difference maker on the defensive line. Penn State's done a really good job here early on. They have a good chance to extend that momentum coming out this weekend here. He was on campus for West Virginia as well. I mean, Penn State's doing a really good job here with Trent Wilson. I mean, obviously with St. Francis Academy kids, it seems to rarely work out for Penn State. Technically never. But perhaps things begin to change on that part.
Yeah, I mean that was the first thing I was going to point out was that he was on campus for the West Virginia game as well. So that's two times in 1 month. Anytime a kid, does that where he, especially a top 100 kid, you probably have the options to visit a
Yep.
lot of different schools. Most kids like to go different places, see different things. If you return to the same place within a couple weeks of each other, that definitely raises an eyebrow to me of okay, the interest in Penn State for Trent Wilson is obviously very real.
Yep.
So that's always a great sign. And Dion Barnes obviously has a nice defensive line class for the 2024. If you can get kids like Trent Wilson in the 2025 class potentially, that's just stacking classes, and that's exactly what you want Dion Barnes to be doing. So he'll be one I think to keep an eye on over the next few months or so.
100% agree with you there. Um, Honestly, with a top 100 kid, this recruitment can go on for quite a while, but sometimes those kids do commit early on in the process as well. I'm not saying that's going to happen with Trent Wilson. We'll see what happens with Trent Wilson, but I mean, very, very good early signs for Penn State in this recruitment. There's going to be a lot of programs after him. We'll see what happens here. We'll see, much like Jalen Harvey, how much does NIL play a factor in that recruitment? Because that could be a deciding factor in Harvey's recruitment. That could potentially be a deciding factor in most of these recruitment, many of these recruitments. We'll see. Moving off Wilson, probably best way to put him as an athlete, but Penn State's recruiting him as an offensive tackle. Brady O'Hara out of North Catholic out on the western side of the state will be back on campus. We do have a future cast in for Brady O'Hara to Penn State. I feel like this is their recruitment to lose at this point. Anytime I would say he shows up on campus at this point in his recruitment is something to watch for. I think I'm not saying he's on commitment watch necessarily, but would anybody be surprised? I don't think so.
Yeah, no, this one feels like a matter of when, not if.
Yep.
It just seems like the writing's on the wall. It's one that Penn State would have to, actively stop recruiting him to lose this one. Is what it feels like.
Good sized kid too.
Yeah,
6'6".
You said he's kind of recruiting him as an athlete. He could be a tight end. He could end up on the offensive line. Could end up on the defensive line. It kind of depends on how Mother Nature decides to take his course.
Sure.
But either way, you got a 4-star kid from Western Pennsylvania, which Penn State has really started to develop a little bit of a monopoly over. Yeah, it used to be that Pitt used to get a few guys, Notre Dame, Michigan, Ohio State would come over. Penn State's really starting to take hold in Western Pennsylvania, which is really good to see because there's obviously a lot of talent out there, and guys like Hayes and Brady O'Hara would really just add to that. That domination in the western part of Pennsylvania.
It's not a phrase we've heard in a long time, but it's something that they've been doing recently. For the most part, dominate the state.
I mean, listen, we don't have to get too much into that right now, but yeah, you always want to do well on the home front. As much as it might not be Franklin's tagline anymore, because obviously Penn State wants to recruit on a national level as opposed to just a regional one. You still have to do well in your region, and Penn State still prioritizes guys in their region and in the home state. So
exactly,
that is extremely important.
Especially those top guys. Penn State's not going to go after a lot of guys who are the 10th to 20th guys in the state. They will pick and choose those guys, but those top couple guys in the state, you absolutely if they're a player that you like, Penn State tries hard as hell to get those guys. So it's basically dominate the state on the guys you choose to go after, which is perfectly fine, obviously, because Penn State does have to recruit at a national level to compete where they want to be competing. Another guy that is kind of feeling like a when, not if, and I think this recruitment is going to go a little bit more because he's a kid who fantastic kid, by the way, talked to him a ton. Somebody who values his education, somebody who just great kid overall, great family. Joshua Williams out of the Haverford Academy. Out near Philly. Kind of feels like a when, not if, Anthony.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. Very athletic guard. Obviously, fits the mold of, from Pennsylvania. Apparently grew up a big Penn State fan and, really loves Penn State. So, I agree with you that he's been on campus multiple times at this point. It's one that as long as Penn State wants him, and it seems like they're interested in him, that it'll happen at some point. I'm not going to say commitment watch or anything like that, but it'll happen at some point. Probably not too much in the future.
It's theirs to lose. It feels like theirs to use. And with this kid's not visiting this weekend, he's staying at home this weekend because he has a busy visit schedule in school and football. But with Joshua Williams. Obviously, Michael Carroll, another offensive lineman out of the Philadelphia area, is a guy that is feeling very much in the same boat as Williams. It's a matter of when, not if. Penn State legacy there. Grew up a huge Penn State fan. I feel like that's also a matter of time. And now Anthony has also left me. Now Anthony will be right back. Moving on to the 2026 class, and if Anthony's back in time, I'll let him give his thoughts. But we got 3 guys to mention here. The first one is defensive tackle Preston Carey out of New York, a top 50 kid, I believe, here on Rivals. One of the Penn State's early notable targets in that 2026 recruiting class at St. Anthony's, I believe, in New York. A huge kid, already 6'4", 280 pounds, I believe, has offers from everywhere in the country. This is going to be a recruitment that obviously 2026 kid. It's going to take a long time to get to the finish line, but definitely a notable 2026 prospect to know of visiting this weekend. Anthony, any early thoughts on Preston Carey? Again, another great kid to talk to. Um, really enjoys the process, and I do know he has some notable Penn State interests early on here, and an area that Penn State has success in recruiting.
Yeah, not so much on Carey necessarily because I haven't really like focused on the 2026 kids just because besides Messiah Mickens because that's just so far away.
Yep.
But
Yeah, we're
like
not
in
going to talk about
general,
these guys in depth. Just quick
yeah,
words.
in general with like those future classes, like that's really what the whiteout's purpose is for.
It's
It's
about
not necessarily for the current class, like the
yep.
2024. Obviously, there's like maybe
There's about
you might get 5 or 6 guys from the current class, and that's
scholarship
on the
guys. Scholarship guys.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, like it's mostly 2025, 2026, maybe a couple of high profile 2027 guys here or there, but you're
Larry
really
Moon.
trying to set yourself up. Yeah, Larry Moon is the big one I thought of too. But you're really trying to set yourself up for those future classes and set the tone in those recruitments. Like it'll make your head spin. Like even for me, and I'm not even in on it. Like I can only imagine these coaching staffs how they handle this with those future classes because it would make my head spin just trying to like process it and keep it all together. There's a reason that recruiting staffs have so many people surrounding it because it really is just a lot.
Yeah, I mentioned Carey just because I think he's going to be one of the top players overall in the region in that 2026 recruiting class. And I think he's going to be a kid we hear about a lot in the next few years. Um, two more, and just because I think there are guys that Penn State could be in a good position for long term. Cumberland Valley offensive lineman Tyler Merrill. Penn State's doing a great job early there. He was on campus for West Virginia. He's in obviously right in state, Cumberland Valley, not that far away. Um, I feel early on, I like Penn State's chances in this one. He's a huge kid, top 100 prospect on Rivals, I believe, already. Very good prospect. And then Penn State legacy linebacker Colson Gadden out of Pittsburgh Central Catholic, son of former Nittany Lion Aaron Gadden. Definitely somebody worth noting there in the 2026 recruiting class. And we also mentioned Larry Moon. If you don't know about Larry Moon already, I would get familiar with Larry Moon's game and his name. Just a terrific cornerback prospect. I went to the a Pitt camp earlier this summer, and he was, I think, the best cornerback there. And there was cornerbacks from the 2024, 2025, 2026 class. He was an incoming high school freshman. He was the best cornerback there. He's a fantastic talent, has a chance to be a very elite talent. So definitely name to know in the 2027 recruiting class. Again, if you want to know all these names, these guys, who else is coming, go over to Happy Valley Insider, pennstate.rivals.com. Subscribe. You can get a 30-day free trial right now. If you subscribe, you can get all these names and more. Get all the updates on Penn State recruiting, Penn State off the field, on the field, everything in between. Over at pennstate.rivals.com, Happy Valley Insider. Be sure to subscribe to us, but also be sure to subscribe to the Penn State 365 podcast and to the Penn State Rivals YouTube channel, which if you're watching this video on YouTube, all you have to do is drop down and hit that subscribe button, and you can get all the latest updates from Penn State recruiting right to your YouTube, or if you're on podcast, right to your phone. It's all it takes is one click of a button. But yeah, be sure to subscribe on YouTube, your favorite podcast. But also, go over to pennstate.rivals.com, subscribe there. And if you don't want to subscribe yet, at least create a free account. We're active on the free message board as well. We do about once a month a free expert Q&A where you can ask us anything and we will be an open book about it. We'll tell you what you know. It doesn't matter what you ask. Well, I guess within reason. But no matter what you ask, we'll probably answer it in our once a month expert Q&As and more. We're always active over there. Go over, create a free account. But if you would like, also subscribe, and you can get all the inside information on Penn State recruiting and more. Anthony, any final thoughts on Penn State's whiteout recruiting here? The 2024 class, the 2025 class, anything you would like to say about recruiting? We haven't talked about it a ton recently. We should start doing it more, but any final thoughts today?
Yeah, there hasn't really been a whole lot to talk about with recruiting,
It's
which is
been very
probably why we
quiet.
haven't talked about it. Like it's been pretty quiet for the most part. We're back into the season. We'll get probably a couple of 2025 guys that commit between now and the end of the season. Maybe
2024 mostly wrapped up, but there's a couple spots
yeah,
left.
maybe they get one or two, obviously, because they're at 24 right now. I
Yeah.
believe they'll probably want to get to maybe 26 or 27 at the most for 2024. So you look at maybe two or three more guys, but yeah, I mean, obviously for this weekend, I personally thought that maybe the West Virginia game would have a better list than the whiteout. I don't know why I thought that. Maybe just first game of the
A
year.
big first game, prime time, sure. No,
Yeah, prime time. I
and it was
thought
a
maybe
very good list.
it was a very good list. Very, very good. A lot of crossover as well between the West Virginia game and this one. But
Yep.
yeah, no, I was dead wrong. The whiteout list is significantly better, and there's just I called it a who's who of like guys that Penn State is recruiting in the 2025 and 2026 classes because it's deep, and when you have a list of guys like that showing up, not only do the players want to show out, the coaches want to show out, the fans need to show out as well. So whether it's rain or beautiful skies, whatever it ends up being, wear white and be loud because the recruits take notice of that and they want to play in those environments.
Yeah. And it's worth noting that we're going to confirm probably upwards of 80, 100 kids before kickoff on Saturday, but there's going to be a lot of kids that we haven't confirmed before kickoff that we're going to find out later on. I mean, I'm not going to be surprised in the 2024 class if there's some guys that flew under the radar, potentially, flip candidates. Perhaps they didn't want to get out to their current coaching staffs or coaching staffs they're committed to that they're going to potentially visit. So I wouldn't be shocked if we see that. Those always happen these types of games. Some of the kids may decide not to show up too, so we'll see what happens. But it's going to be a very interesting recruiting weekend for Penn State. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see, it Hayes obviously has come in somewhere on Monday. We think it could be Penn State. But if there's a couple commitments in the couple weeks after this, maybe that 2025 class, I wouldn't be shocked either.
Yeah, no, definitely not. These games tend to have a big impact on recruits, and especially with guys that are in state or in the region, you never know.
All right. Well, let's wrap it up there. We've gone on an hour and 40. For everybody on YouTube, thanks for listening to today's podcast. And for our podcast listeners, I know we split this up into two. I may even choose to split it up for our YouTube viewers as well. We'll figure it out. But at the end of the day, no matter how you listen to this, no matter what we chose to do, thank you for listening to another episode of the Penn State 365 podcast. Thank you for being a loyal listener, a subscriber to the podcast, I hope. Be sure to hit those subscribe buttons to YouTube and on your favorite podcast app. And again, please go over to Happy Valley Insider. If you don't want to subscribe, at least create a free account. Join the message board, join the Penn State community, the Happy Valley Insider community, and get all your latest information over to happyvalleyinsider.com, or pennstate.rivals.com. Until next time, everybody, enjoy the weekend. Enjoy Penn State versus Iowa on Saturday night. Enjoy the football on Sunday. We'll be back probably on Sunday night to recap everything. But until then, everybody, have a good one. Enjoy and stay safe.